Is the Earth millions or billions of years old? Or is it only 6,000 to 10,000 years old? This is the difference between the old Earther group and the young Earther group. Many Christians in pop culture today don't understand exactly why it is so crucial to get to the bottom of this question. Believe it or not, the answer becomes evangelistic. How could that be possible? How could the age of the earth have anything to do with reaching people for Christ? We're going to get into that, as well as a whole bunch of other topics. And believe it or not, we are going to reach the conclusion that most people have never reached, and that is this: the earth is both young and old. How? Stay tuned. Did you know that the Donna Howell Show now has merchandise? I am currently wearing the Theology Isn't Just for Boys royal purple hoodie. But we have a lot of other products coming in this line, as well as some other fun products very soon. We have hoodies, t-shirts, sweaters, bags, cups, stickers, and more. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen to see all of the merch options. Now, back to the Donna Howell Show. Brittany Jackson, thank you for joining me on the Donna Howell Show again today.
Great to be here. This topic is really kind of a controversial topic within Christianity, within the historical group of people, scientific group of people. There's a lot of these opposing arguments, and I think your perspective, spoiler alert, is the most interesting of them all, because instead of just taking one side or the other, you and Tom, whenever you guys wrote Before Genesis and then turned it into a documentary with Void Earth, I think it shocked a lot of people because it was just this perfect marriage of both ideas, and that there's parts from every side that are correct.
It also actually brings in the scientific point of view.
Right.
And listen, from the very, very get-go of this series, this is never going to fit into only one episode. So we're going to have to break this into a series. And so you're going to be hearing me refer to science several times. I want to be very clear what I mean when I say science. I mean genuine reality as God has created it. Now, that is a huge leap from what somebody in a lab coat has reported.
Right.
Because a lot of Christians, they come forward and go, oh, you cannot trust science. Science is a man-studied thing. It's a lab report that somebody got because somebody did something in a petri dish, or they calculated something with mathematics, or they studied a protein, and they're just reporting to you what they've observed, but it doesn't prove anything about cosmology or the beginning of mankind or Earth or anything. That is all true. That is all true. But when I'm referring to science, I am referring to genuine reality as God has created it. Now, this is where it gets very important to understand that when people hear that there is a growing number of people in the Old Earthers community that has interpreted the biblical narrative in view of what we can observe about the earth today.
Right.
Because there is this like age-old assumption that the Bible and science cannot agree. They're incompatible. They might get lucky and agree over here in this marginal issue, but for the most part, science is science and the Bible is the Bible, and theology and science do not mix. Or that you can believe in science or you can believe in the Bible, but you really can't entertain the idea of them merging in any way. Listen, when the Bible and the science disagree, it is in human error. That's why when Christians say you can't trust science, I say, well, yeah, that is a valid argument. Because what is science? Is it an observation or is it a conclusion?
Right.
That is a very, very distinct difference. I can observe that, the clothing that you're wearing is tan and brown today.
Yeah.
But it concludes nothing about where you come from, who you are. The beginning and the origins of all things creation and life, intelligent design versus this ridiculous idea of randomized evolution, or the fact that we would ever come from monkeys. Let me get that out of the way. Mankind is made in the image of God, not the image of monkeys or any kind of other primate ancestor. So a lot of people, when they hear that I am taking science into consideration, they assume I mean something that was spoken by a man in a lab coat. I'm referring to true, genuine reality. And that, by the way, is and always will be compatible with the Bible. It has to be, because God made science. God made everything that we can see. He created both the protein and the petri dish. He is the
Right.
master scientist. God is the God over science. So again, I'll say it one last time. I'm not talking about what is being reported by the people in the scientific community. I am talking about observation, as far as we can tell, greatly stacks in favor of a very old Earth. Now, there are people listening to me going, wait a minute, hold on. I've heard all these young Earth sciences. I heard about, this stone that does this, or the dinosaurs that did that, and all of these little things that point to the idea that the Earth really is only 6,000 to 10,000 years old. Yeah, it is. That's why the conclusion that Tom and I came to is both mind-boggling, but it also happens to be a conclusion that from the very beginning we were warned not to go there by a very famous theologian. So I'm going to tell that story super quick. We had gone out to dinner with this gentleman. There was a conference a number of years ago. We were in the same town, and he was friends with Tom. So Tom and I and this unnamed, for the sake of his ministry, by the way.
Right.
This is how controversial this topic is. This theologian I'm referring to is one of the most well-known theologians in the world, actually. That in this theologian's personal ministry, if he came out and said, I believe that the earth is very old, he would be cut off from his ministry. He would
Wow.
lose all of his supporters, his sponsors. He would be kicked out, completely ostracized.
Canceled, basically.
Canceled and ostracized from his own community because they are a group of young earthers. But he's also happens to be an expert in Hebrew, biblical Hebrew. And so he was out to dinner with us, and Tom said, I really, really need you to help me write this. Only you can do it. You're the only one that can really fully understand what this Hebrew in these first few verses of Genesis are saying, what they're describing. And the theologian says to Tom, my father, he says, Tom, I love you, buddy, but there is no way. What you are asking is to start a war. And so, of course, not risk, but you know how Tom was.
Yeah.
Like I care. Everything with him was just like, I don't know. Am I going to reach somebody with the gospel? Then I don't care.
Yeah.
As long as it's theologically responsible, as long as the Bible allows that to be true, and as long as I can reach somebody with it, we're going there. And I don't care if I
Right.
start a war amongst all the scholars. But basically, the original response was, Tom, if you do this, you are going to start a war. To which my father says, well, I'm not really concerned about that. But how do you, listening to my theories about the earth, young and old, how it all mingles with science and all of these things, and bringing in theology, bringing in the original fallen cherub into the mix, bringing in the destruction of what could have been the original planet, all of these ideas, once I bring them all to the table, he says to the theologian, are you telling me that I might be right or wrong about this? Funnily enough, his response was, oh, Tom, not only is what you are saying possible, it is the likeliest interpretation
Wow.
once you consider the true Hebrew.
Yeah.
He said, not English, not the English translations of the Bible, not what this one guy over there interpreted from English. He says, when you take it back to the very original Hebrew, what you are saying is the likeliest possible scenario. So my dad's response, of course, was, then why can't I get you to write this for me or write this with me? And he said, no, I'll lose my ministry. You're going to start a war. I just can't put that kind of thing on myself.
Wow.
Then he flips it on my father and he says, do you realize that you're about to start a war by writing this? And and my father just said, look, here's the thing. If we're going to be talking about numbers, the number of people coming against me, the numbers of this, the numbers of that, he said, I don't care about a numbers game until we're talking about souls. Then I care about a numbers game. I care not about the quantity, but about the quality of people reaching the Lord through a message that has been given to the lost. And of course, this theologian asked the same question that a lot of people do. Well, you're talking about a non-essential, Tom. You're talking about the age of the earth. Why would it matter in the light of things with who you're trying to reach with the gospel? Go preach Jesus. And of course, my father's response, which was the same as mine, is how many times have we been in a conversation with somebody that does not already know the Lord, and their instant reaction upon hearing that the Bible says the earth is 6,000 years old is, I can't trust the Bible. If I
Right.
can't even trust the Bible beyond the first two verses, the first two sentences in the Bible, if I cannot trust the Bible further than that, then I can't trust anything else the document of 66 documents has to say.
Yeah. No, I could see that. And I think your dad and you guys have never been afraid to go against the culture, even if it is the Christian culture that is the norm. With Petrus Romanus, all these kind of controversial books, a lot of people might, oh yeah, why are you focusing on these minuscule topics? But to a lot of people, that's the elephant in the room as to why, like you said, they're not becoming Christian, is because they do believe in science. And if this one thing that isn't even true is the thing holding them back, then you're losing. And I don't think a lot of people realize the people who believe in science is becoming more than Christians.
Oh, for sure.
So you're missing out on like more than half the population not paying attention to the Bible because of this one thing.
Well, and I don't think it's because of this one thing, but I think that it starts with this one thing often. I think people get, let me give you an example. And I actually told the story in the book before Genesis. But there was this day that I was at a natural food store where they have a lot of, the natural protein powders, organic produce, all of the supplements you could imagine, just a natural food store. And the guy that was there, his name was Daniel Belt. I did mention him in the book by name because he joined us for a while. He actually originally helped Joe there for a while start the Eden's line, the Eden's Essentials line. And so Daniel Belt was there. This is before he joined up forces with us. And he was standing in the supplement section. And now listen, by this time we had seen each other just about every Sunday for several months, because that's when we did our grocery shopping for my own home, was every Sunday. And my husband and kids will always, hi, Daniel. They really loved Daniel. So they would run in, and my daughter loved it, especially because she always has a symptom. No matter what, my daughter has a symptom. And so she would run in and meet Daniel. Okay, this week, this is what's going on. I had a cough.
Cute.
And then of course, in Daniel, he was such a sweetheart. He would always listen to the big, long story. And then, okay, well, this is what I would recommend. And he was looking over at me like, okay, Mom, I'm not really putting this in your cart,
Yeah.
So we had a cool relationship at this point that he was our supplements hookup guy. Well, after months of having a friendship with him that was super casual, the subject of religion happened to come up because he mentioned, that this was God's earth.
Right.
And that the answer to a lot of our, medical malady can come from the earth. And that we would, in previous generations, we would be self-medicating every time we ate a salad.
Right.
Because that's where we would get the nutrients for our body. But now our soil is depleted and so on and so forth and forever. So he's talking about God's earth. And I thought, well, there's an opportunity for me to ask. Now, listen, if he would have told me that he believed something that was completely incompatible with me, I still would have respected him. I would not have stood there in the middle of a store on Sunday and proselytized or tried to make a convert and scratch another one off on my belt. I am open for an opportunity to see where are people with this, and always open for that opportunity should God present that. And this is how the story went down. I said, so Daniel, you mentioned that this is God's green earth. Like, I'm not trying to pry, but are we talking about the same God?
Right.
He clammed up immediately. And I thought, uh-oh, too much too soon. But he clammed up immediately, and this was his response. His first response to that question was, you see, Donna, the earth is very old. No, like, in my mind at the moment, I'm thinking, what does the age of the earth have to do with what God you believe in?
Right.
What in the world? That was where I was coming from because, I've been kind of in the debate my whole life. So to me, I'm just like, I don't get it. But then immediately afterward, he started to kind of explain to me why he felt like that needed to be said. And over a period of 6 weeks, we'd had a good laugh about it by now. And he was like, yeah, well, you know what? The minute I find out someone is a Christian, the minute we have to butt heads because they believe that the earth is about 6,000 to 10,000 years old. So I don't like talking to Christians. He is a Christian. He is God-fearing. He's absolutely God-fearing. His theology is so compatible with ours in so many hundreds of different ways. But he was not willing to have that conversation with me in the beginning because the earth is old.
Right.
That's how big of a thing this is. You can't even engage in the topic about religion, God at all with certain people because they're automatically going to come back to the age of the earth. So again, there is this age-old assumption that the Bible and science contradict, that you have to believe one or the other, but not both. Now, that is true of flawed science. That is true because in flawed science, we do have what one man observed, and then it was peer reviewed, and they made a theory or a conclusion based on the best data that they had, but
Right.
nobody can get in a time machine and go back to the cosmological origin of the universe and say exactly what happened. There are, very good reasons to believe that something very hot did explode in space at some point, but that does not necessarily mean that we came from monkeys, and that's where
Yeah.
a lot of people outside of the church don't take us seriously anymore.
Yeah.
That's the big, well, if we don't admit that we came from monkeys and that we came instead from the image of God, this is where we differ. So see how this just instantaneously breaks down the wall. That is why the age of the earth, once properly understood, or at least once properly given the moment to be entertained in what the Hebrew actually says, can break down barriers between the secular people, the people who, whether they refer to it this way or not, would essentially have science be their religion or their God,
Yeah.
and Christianity. That is where it all breaks down. That's where most of the time it all breaks down. True, genuine reality is the science that God brought to the way that this world works. And I think that that is a very big difference between that and something that is peer-reviewed, science reported. And then lastly, I will say this. True science. A lot of people say that the old earthers are just trying to make the Bible agree with science or science agree with the Bible. But the bottom line, and I teased this at the beginning, I'll come back around to it. The bottom line is that people often forget that there are at least two revelations of God to mankind. And no, I am not starting a new theology or a new movement. Listen, there's at least two revelations of God to mankind. One is the Word. Did he or did he not inspire mankind to write his word? Is it therefore not the living, breathing word of God that is
Right.
100% what he revealed to us about himself, his nature, his character? Okay.
Yeah.
Then there's the other revelation. What we see with our eyes when we look at this world. It's his creative revelation to us. Every time we go outside and look at a tree blowing in the wind or see that the sky is blue or look at a beautiful sunset, that is the revelation of God's creation to mankind. It's our ability to observe. So ask yourself two questions very quickly. Number one, did God inspire the written word of his own word to mankind? The answer to that is obviously yes.
Yeah.
Did God create the universe and all of the science in it, and is therefore the master scientist over all of what we observe? The answer to that is also yes. So if he had a role in the Bible being written to be his self-revelatory word of God to mankind, and if he created the earth that we observe on the daily, then he is the God of both science and theology, and the two of those must agree. That does not mean that the observations made by mankind in a laboratory must agree with the word. It means
Right.
that genuine reality always will and always has agreed with what the Bible says. One more thing before we move on. The mistake the church made in relation to the work of Galileo, and actually Copernicus before that. Galileo was a devout Roman Catholic who was able to study very, very complex space bodies through his telescopes. And Copernicus, even before him, they had come forth with a discovery that challenged the church.
Right.
And this was hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And what it was the heliocentric model. Now, what that is in short is that the sun is at the center of the universe, and the planets, including Earth, rotate around the sun. The geocentric model is the idea that the earth is at the center of the universe and the sun and everything rotates around it. Well, we believed in the geocentric model as the church for a long time, back before we had the capability of observing space. In part, the reason that we believed in the geocentric model is because of Psalm 93:1, which says, "The world is also established that it cannot be moved." So the earlier theologians took that quite literally and said that the earth does not move, it's in the center of everything and everything runs around it. when first Copernicus, but later famously Galileo, came forward and said, look, I can see with the power of my own eye holes. I am looking into space and I can see what the space bodies are doing. I've tracked the rotation. I've looked at the way these things move. And I'm telling you that the sun is at the center, not the earth. Galileo was branded a heretic.
Yeah.
He was put under a lifelong house arrest. All of his written works up to that point had to be, the distribution had to stop. They became prohibited material. Most of it was burned. And then he was imprisoned for the rest of his life because he had the audacity to challenge the Bible and say that the sun was actually at the center of all things. Now listen, here we are hundreds of years later. We know that the heliocentric model is true. We know that the sun is at the center of the universe. We know that. The church is no longer threatened by understanding that that verse in Psalms is referring to a provisionary authority of God over mankind.
Right, not a literal,
not a
physical
scientific
planet.
Statement.
Yeah.
Listen, the Bible has a reflection of the observation of science in it, obviously, or it wouldn't be talking about the creation of the earth. But the Bible is not a science manual, and it was never meant to be a science manual.
Yeah.
So, like anthropomorphic phrasing in the Bible as well. If God reaches his hand over the heavens, for instance, God doesn't have a hand. God is spirit. Nobody in the ancient world looked up and saw a giant hand.
That'd be kind of scary.
Yeah. But we know when we read that, yes, it is true. It is a true statement. God reaches his hand over the heavens. He protects his people. But we know that that's not a literal hand with skin and flesh and bone reaching over what we can see. So we understand that there is a matter of poetic delivery.
Yeah. It's like saying the apple of my eye. You're not actually an apple inside of my eye.
Right. Oh, good Lord, how painful. Or like when Jesus said, that the man would need to remove the log from his own eye before judging the splinter in his neighbor's. A log, my word. See, so there's a lot of language in the Bible that just can and should be understood as a euphemism, a delivery of poetic language, something that we can understand. The very idea of being anthropomorphized, the idea of God being used in human terminology so that we can understand him in our own human languages and minds. So that is what the original verse in Psalm meant, and that is what the church was finally able to put to bed. But guess how long it took? 300 years. 300 years. From the minute that Galileo got a lot of people to start believing that this heliocentric model might be true, all the way to the time that the church finally decided to revisit Scripture and get it established once and for all that this was not supposed to be a scientific statement about the fact that the earth never literally moves in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. It just reminds me, I'm in my master's for history, and I've done a lot of research on the Catholic Church, Protestant Reformation, the Spanish Inquisition. And what's funny is in the Spanish Inquisition, they had banned a lot of series of books. Hundreds and hundreds of books got banned, and the church still held on to them. And it wasn't until the 1800s that somebody said, why don't we revisit these books that we had banned and just see what they're about? Let's make sure that they are these heretical books. And the majority of them, they looked back and it's just kids' stories. There's nothing inherently wrong or heretical about them. But they had this belief for almost 300 years, like you said, where they had all these heretical books. And so I think this is a good example of it's okay to look back and re-research things. We don't have to accept something that was established by man, not by God, and make that the truth going forward. It's okay to revisit science. It's okay to revisit what these church figures have said.
Well, and then again, this is a different episode for another day. But I'll just pose the question for now: what are we so afraid of anyway?
Right.
What are we so afraid of anyway? The idea that our theology would be challenged by something else. What exactly is being challenged?
Yeah.
Whether or not God exists, well, you can't challenge that. Whether or not my traditions are going to be lost, that somebody else might come along with an interpretive idea or something that says, look, I think this might be truer to what the original Greek and Hebrew of the Bible was saying. And that means, of course, you're going to have to lose one of your traditions. I don't know about you, but I'd rather lose every tradition. I would rather never be a man of tradition. Like, Paul speaks of holding on to traditions. And it's not a bad thing to have traditions, but you can't allow them to be the reason why you are not going to be enlightened by a truth of God.
Right.
What are you afraid of?
Yeah, why are you so afraid to question the established narrative? And again, it's not the established narrative of the Bible. We're not saying, and I think it is okay to question the Bible in the sense that you're going to do your own research, learn the Hebrew, learn the Greek, and understand what it's really saying. You're not questioning God when you do that. You're questioning man's interpretation of the Greek and Hebrew, which of course has been lost in translation. That's one of the big themes on your show.
Yeah, and if it took the church 300 years to accept that Galileo might have been onto something, I pose a question now, how many hundreds of years are going to have to go by now for the church to finally reach the people that say, I would believe in the Bible, but I can't get past the first statement it makes.
Right.
I would believe in God, but I can't trust the Bible because it lies in the first few passages.
Yeah.
It says that the earth is only 6,000 to 10,000 years old. Now listen, again, the conclusion that I'm about to share with everybody is one that I have not heard before.
I haven't either.
And it's probably a minority of scholars that have reached a similar kind of conclusion, but I've never seen anybody that have been able to take all three voices, old earthers, young earthers, and science, and put it into a playing field where we can all be friends. And we can all, to some degree, land on a conclusion that we can feel is true. I am going to get into this more in the future of this series. But one of the things I want to tease a little bit is the without form and void. What that says in Hebrew is not without form and void. It is not what it says. I'm not saying that the literal words that were chosen by the KJV translators were wrong, but again, they were incomplete. Once you take not only the Hebrew, the actual Hebrew, where we're going to hit these words, but also the Hebrew words in context of the ancient Hebrew, how it worked, how one word communicated with the other, how they merged together, whether or not there would have been vowels. By the way, hint, hint, there were no vowels. So the people, there's a growing number of people that are arguing whether or not, when God created the earth, if that was bara or bara. One means essentially to create out of a pre-existing matter, and the other means to create out of nothing. And they argue and argue and argue. No, this is what it was in Hebrew. No, this is what it was in Hebrew. Listen, vowels did not exist in Hebrew at that time. It could be either. And people don't like to hear that.
Yeah.
But when it gets into the debate about whether or not the earth is very old or very young, suddenly the fact that it could be either is very interesting for reasons that I will pick up very soon in this discussion. But I want to get it out there right away. Imagine this. God created in the very, very beginning, let's just say however long science requires, millions of years ago, billions of years ago, just pretend for a moment that that's true, that that's when God created the earth. But the earth wasn't necessarily instantaneously inhabited by mankind or humankind. Now, there's going to be people that are sitting there going, oh, she's about to pull the day age thing. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
There are people that will know that there is a debate about whether or not the Hebrew word yom in Hebrew meant day or did it mean age. Was this 6, 7 literal days of creation plus rest is in 24-hour period, or was this 24 ages? And then, again, I know this is going to make a lot of people upset with me to say so, but it could be either. And we'll get into that as well. But the words without form and void mean a desolated wasteland of chaos. So in the very, very beginning, God created the earth, and then it became a desolated wasteland of chaos. By whom, you ask? Who was on earth before Adam? Well, nobody, an average Christian would say, well, no, we know that's not true, because the angels were created before Adam.
Yeah.
And as we're about to get into, including the ones that fell, a certain number of angels inhabited the earth. Angels or cherubim, technically they are not the same creation. A lot of people think that cherubs and angels are the same thing. They're not. But some kind of an angelic part of God's celestial army did in fact inhabit the earth before the time of Adam. They viewed the creation of the earth. They were here. They saw it. And then the earth, something happened to it that made it a desolate wasteland of chaos. And then later, God recreated everything. Now, at what point did this earth get covered in water? Everybody goes, oh, I know that one. It's the Noah's flood. What if that was the second one? What if there was a really serious global flood that happened way before the flood of Noah's day? Now, secular science would potentially even call this the Ice Age.
Right.
Or maybe it had even happened prior to that. We don't know exactly how many things. All we can do is study the layering of the earth and hope that we can get as close to the truth as we can. And there would be people that argue with me and they say, yes, we can. We know exactly what happened to the earth and how many times it was flooded and how many this and how many that. Ask a young earther. They will give you science after science after science after science that refutes everything you're about to say. So that's why where this is going is very interesting. Creation as it starts in Genesis could be the very, very beginning. And that's why they use the word in the beginning, meaning way, way back when. And then at some point, the earth was, wait for it, recreated or restored to what God originally wanted it to be, or otherwise known as the restitution theory. Now, if that's true, if that happened, watch what happens. The earth is very old. This is why we have all kinds of scientific evidence and observation that the earth is very old. But then 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, God fixed what someone else, an enemy of God, had destroyed. And that is why we have evidence that the earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old, because he restored what he originally did. The earth was relayered.
Right.
The earth had a fresh something that occurred in its surfaces and the depths of the oceans 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. And if that's the case, then we will have evidence of both. And science, true science, genuine reality as God created it, will also be true. See how the three voices merge.
Yeah.
Now we're going to get into exactly how that happened and what all of these things mean. Let me give you just a quick tease on some of the things we're going to be talking about in the coming weeks. The meaning of the Hebrew words, tohu vabohu. That is where we get the English words without form and void. Some of you guys might be at home thinking, oh, she's about to quote from some completely crazy, obscure, some guy that nobody listens to in order to prop up her ideas of the old earth. No, listen, it goes as mainstream as James Strong of the James Strong Concordance. I mean, this is like one of the leading... Growing up in church, every pastor I ever knew had a Strong's Concordance on the shelf. That is how you get to know, or at least was until recently, how you knew definitively what every word in the Bible meant. You went straight to your concordance and you looked up what James Strong had to say. Yeah. This is coming from James Strong. Tohu means to lie waste, or a desolation of wasted surface. Surface of what? Okay, bohu, he says, it means a vacuity or a nothingness, or get this, in other words, an undistinguishable ruin. Okay, so straight out of the gate, in the beginning, God created the earth, and the earth was without form and void. Without form and void, meaning a place of ruination. Not... God was just up there and he was taking a quick 10-minute coffee break, but it hadn't been completed yet.
It's like a piece of Play-Doh that's just sitting on a table, not formed into an earth yet.
Right. It doesn't mean incomplete, but will be soon.
Yeah.
It means it was wasted, destroyed. Even James Strong goes there. Now, I will save a lot of this, but listen, I wanted to give the setup, you guys, because there's a lot of people out there that would say that I'm nuts, I'm off my rocker, I've completely lost it if I'm going to go old earth. But the idea that I go both is going to make a lot of people go, oh, she's just trying to do anything she can't. Listen, the threads lead there. The threads of evidence lead there. That's where they naturally lead. So I'm excited to get into more of this with you in the coming weeks. We are going to hit those words hard. First thing, next week, we're going to get into the Hebrew tohu vabohu, what they mean both in and out of context by themselves as words that are isolated, and then exactly what they mean in context. And then we're going to get into some interesting theology and some reflection on archaeology as well. Because folks, if you think we don't have proof, we do. There are serpent worship sites all over ancient earth. And they all speak of a story of something happening prior to the time of Adam. So we are going to get into all of that fascinating stuff at the beginning of next week. Keep watching the series. Thank you so much for watching.